The carriage had already pulled up to the front steps when her uncle pressed the document into her hands and told her to sign it. She did not sign it. He took it back without a word and told the driver to go on without her. She could walk, he said. It wasn't far. It was 11 miles, and it was October. And she had no coat that wasn't already packed into the trunk that had gone ahead with the carriage. But he said it the way men say things when they have already decided and are merely waiting for the room to agree with them. Her name was Sylveth Crane. She was 23 years old. The house they were standing in front of, the house she had grown up in, the house where her father had taught her to read Latin at the dining room table, and her mother had died in the blue bedroom at the end of the hall, was no longer hers. Technically, it had not been hers for 2 years, not since her father's death and the discovery of a will her uncle had produced at the reading that none of them had ever seen before. Practically, it had not been hers for much longer than that, but she had continued to live in it, in the back rooms, on the understanding that her uncle was permitting this out of kindness. She understood now that the kindness had always been contingent. She did not walk 11 miles. She hired a cart from the farmer at the end of the lane, paid for it with the last of the coins she had kept sewn into the lining of her traveling cloak. A habit her mother had taught her, saying a woman should always have money that no one knew about, and arrived at Thornmere House 40 minutes after the carriage, sitting in the back among the cabbages with her one remaining bag held on her lap. The housekeeper who met her at the servants' entrance looked at her for a long moment before saying anything. Her name was Mrs. Partridge, and she was the sort of woman who had worked in large houses long enough that very little surprised her anymore. "You're the new kitchen maid," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," said Sylveth. She had not told anyone she was the new kitchen maid. She had applied for the position 3 weeks ago under a different name, her mother's maiden name, which was common enough in this part of the country, and had been hired by letter without an interview. She had done this deliberately. She knew what was in this house. She had known it since she was 9 years old, when her father had sat across from her at that same dining room table with a letter in his hands, and told her that if anything ever happened to him, there was something she needed to find. He had told her where it would be. He had described it in enough detail that she had never forgotten, even though she had been 9, even though 16 years had since passed, and she had never had occasion to come here until now. The kitchen was warm. Someone had made a beef broth that morning, and the smell of it still clung to the walls. Sylveth set down her bag in the corner Mrs. Partridge pointed to, and spent the remainder of the afternoon learning which pots went where. No one asked her anything else that first day. The Duke of Thornmere was not at the house when she arrived. This was both fortunate and inconvenient. Fortunate because it meant she had time to learn the house, its rhythms and schedules, which rooms were used and which were closed, who went where and when. Inconvenient because the room she needed to access was the library, and the library, she had discovered within her first week, was the Duke's preferred room. He worked there in the mornings when he was in residence. He had given instructions, according to Mrs. Partridge, that no one should disturb him there without cause. His name was Aldworth Mercer. He was 34 years old. She learned from the other kitchen staff, and he had been the Duke for 6 years, since his father's death. He was not, by the account of those who worked for him, an unkind man. Exacting, they said. Quiet. He noticed things other employers did not notice, and he remembered them, which made some of the staff nervous and others merely careful. "He came through the kitchen once," said the cook, a woman named Margaret, who had been at Thornmere for 20 years, and he saw that Milly had been crying. He didn't say anything then, but the next day he asked me, quiet-like, whether everything was all right with her at home. He'd remembered her name and everything. "What had happened?" Sylveth asked. Her brother had died, Margaret said. The Duke arranged for her to take a week to go home to her family, paid her the same. He didn't make a fuss about it, just saw to it. Sylveth filed this away. She was good at filing things away. She was there for 3 weeks before she found her first opportunity to enter the library. It was a Thursday afternoon in late October, after the household had received word that the Duke would not return until Friday. Sylveth had been assigned to dust the ground floor rooms, which no one wanted to do in autumn when the cold came through the windows. She had taken her time about it. She had done the morning room first, and then the drawing room, and then the hall. By the time she pushed open the library door, the light was already going. The room smelled of old books and wood smoke. The fire had been laid but not lit. She stood in the doorway for a moment looking at it. The shelves that covered 3 walls from floor to ceiling, the long table in the center with its scatter of papers, the 2 tall windows looking out over the park where the bare trees stood in the mist. She had imagined this room her entire adult life. She knew what she was looking for. Her father had been specific, a false panel in the bookcase on the east wall, behind the collected letters of the 3rd Earl of Harwick. He had described the book, brown leather, gold lettering, 3 volumes, set together on the 2nd shelf from the bottom. He had said the panel released by pressing the spine of the 2nd volume in a particular way. She found the books in under a minute. She was pressing the spine of the 2nd volume when she heard the sound of boots in the hall. She had time to step back from the bookcase. She was not certain she had time to reach the door. She made a decision, which was to stay where she was, duster in hand, and continue working. She had been assigned to dust this room. She was dusting it. If anyone asked, that was what she was doing. The man who came through the door was not anyone she recognized. Then she realized she had never seen the Duke before. He was taller than she had expected, though she was not sure where the expectation had come from. He had dark hair, not quite gray at the temples but close, and he was still wearing his traveling coat, which meant he had come straight from the road without stopping, which meant the message about Friday had been wrong. He stopped when he saw her. He looked at her. Then he looked around the room. "Where is Mrs. Partridge?" he said. "I don't know, Your Grace," Sylveth said. "I was assigned to dust the ground floor rooms. I haven't been long." He did not look satisfied with this. He looked, she thought, like a man who was calculating something, adding up small facts and checking them against each other. She kept her hands still on the duster and did not let herself look at the bookcase. "You're new," he said. "Yes, Your Grace. What's your name?" "Sylveth," she said, and then caught herself. She had given her mother's family name for the application. She could not remember for one terrifying moment what she had written. "Sylveth Morrow," she said. "Morrow? Yes, that was it." He looked at her for another moment, then he nodded toward the door. "Leave the rest of the room," he said. "I'll need it this evening." "Yes, Your Grace." She went. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall for a moment and breathed. She had not found it. She would have to try again. It was harder to find opportunities after that. The Duke was in residence, which meant the library was occupied for most of the day. She watched his schedule as carefully as she could from the kitchen. When he ate, when he went out, when he received visitors, he was methodical. When he walked in the park in the afternoons, for exactly 45 minutes, if the weather permitted. He took his dinner at 7. He worked in the library in the mornings and again in the evenings, sometimes until late. She noticed, caught herself listening for him in a way that had nothing to do with strategy. This annoyed her. She had not come to Thornmere to notice the Duke's voice or the way he thanked Margaret for his dinner with what seemed like genuine attention, not the reflexive courtesy of a man performing gratitude but actual, considered acknowledgement. She had not come to notice the fact that he was, by every observation available to her, precisely the sort of man her father would have liked. She pushed this away. She had a job to do. The second opportunity came on a Tuesday afternoon when a message arrived requiring the Duke's immediate presence at a neighboring estate. He left within the hour. Sylveth was in the kitchen when he went and heard the carriage wheels on the gravel. She waited another 30 minutes, long enough for the ordinary business of the household to resume, and then she made her way upstairs. She was in the library in 4 minutes. She was at the bookcase in 5. The panel released exactly as her father had said it would. Behind it was a small space, not much deeper than her forearm, and inside the space was a box, wooden, plain, the kind of thing you might keep letters in. She lifted it out, hands steady. She set it on the floor. She opened it. There were letters, 30 or 40 of them, she thought, bundled in groups. A small journal, a folded document that felt stiffer than the rest, paper of better quality, sealed with wax that had long since dried to dust. She recognized her father's handwriting on the top bundle, and then below that, in a different hand, her own name, her full name, her real name. She sat down on the library floor and began to read. She was still reading when the door opened. She heard it and did not run. There was nowhere to run to, and she had, somewhere in the past 45 minutes, arrived at the end of something that had taken her 23 years to reach. She looked up. The Duke stood in the doorway, still in his coat again, looking at her, sitting on the floor of his library with a box of letters in her lap. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "The meeting was cancelled," he said finally. "I see," said Sylveth. He came into the room. He did not tell her to stand up or to explain herself. He looked at the box in her lap and at the panel she had not thought to close, and at the letter she was still holding. She watched him doing the arithmetic of it, adding up what he saw, checking it against what he knew. She had learned in the past weeks that he was very good at this. "Those were in the wall," he said. "Yes, how did you know they were there?" She looked at the letter in her hand, her name in that other person's writing. The date on it was almost 20 years old. "My father told me," she said, "before he died." Something shifted in his face. It was not exactly surprise. It was more like the recognition of something half-expected. "Who was your father?" he asked. She told him. She gave him the full name, the real name, the name that belonged to a family that had once had an estate of their own 40 miles north, and a connection to this house that went back 2 generations. She watched him hear it. She watched him think. He sat down in the chair behind the long table, not because he was asserting authority, she thought, but because he needed to sit. He set his hat on the table and looked at her for a moment. "I know that name," he said. "I know you do," she said. "There are letters here from your father to mine, and from mine to yours. They go back 30 years. I've seen some of them," he said. "Not all. I didn't know there was a second set. There's more than letters," she said. She picked up the folded document, the one on heavier paper. "My father's solicitor told my uncle that the will had never been amended after my mother died. My uncle produced a will at the reading that cut me out entirely. I've always believed it was forged. I think the proof of that is here." The Duke looked at the document. He did not reach for it. He said, "That's a serious accusation. I know it is against your uncle." He pressed a document into my hands the morning the carriage came and told me to sign it. He didn't tell me what it was. I didn't sign it. He told me to walk. She paused. It was 11 miles. It was October. The Duke was quiet. "I hired a cart from the farmer at the end of the lane," she said. She didn't know why she was telling him that. She hadn't told anyone that detail. "I sat in the back among the cabbages." He looked at her. Something had changed in his expression. It was not pity, which she would not have wanted, and not judgment. It was something steadier than either of those. "How long have you been in this house?" he asked. 7 weeks, she said. "Under a different name." "Why?" "Because I needed access to this library and I didn't know how else to get it. Because if I had come to you as who I am and told you what I suspected, I would have been a stranger making claims about a dead man's will and a living man's forgery. I would have had nothing. I needed to find this first." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, somewhere, a door opened and closed. One of the stable hands, probably, or the kitchen girl, going to the well. The ordinary sounds of a house going on without knowing anything had changed. "You took a very considerable risk," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'm aware. If you had been found out, I know what would have happened." He looked at her. She had the sense he was trying to decide something, and not a small thing. "May I see it?" he said. "The document." She handed it to him. He unfolded it carefully. He read it slowly, which meant he was reading it properly, and not skimming as people did when they were waiting for someone else to tell them what something meant. She watched his face while he read. She watched him arrive at the part that she had arrived at, the signature, the date, the notation in the margin in her father's hand that described exactly what he had feared. When he looked up, his expression had changed again. "This was written 3 months before your father's death," he said. "Yes, and the will your uncle produced at the reading was dated after that." "Yes." He set the document on the table. He looked at it for a moment. "I have a solicitor who handles matters of this kind," he said. "He is good, and he is discreet." "I can't pay for a solicitor," she said. "Not at present." "I didn't ask you to." She looked at him. He said it so simply. Not as an act of charity performed for an audience, but as a statement of plain fact, the way he had thanked Margaret for dinner, the way he had arranged for Millie to go home to her family without making a fuss about it. She did not know what to do with that kind of plainness. She had not encountered very much of it. "Why?" she said. "You don't know me." "Not really. I've been in your house under a false name for 7 weeks. He picked up the document again and looked at it. Then he looked at the letters, the ones still in her lap, the ones bundled in her father's writing. "My father wrote to yours every month for nearly 20 years, he said. "I know because I found the letters when I went through his things after he died. I read all of them." He paused. "I know who your father was. I know what kind of man he was. I know that he worried about you, and that the worry increased in the last year of his life." He looked at her. "I know that I was supposed to have been told at some point that you existed. And I was not. I've wondered about that since I read those letters." Sylveth sat very still on the library floor. "He didn't tell me about the connection," she said slowly. "Not all of it. He told me about the box. He told me where it was. He told me to come here if I ever needed to. But he didn't tell me why. I think he intended to tell you more," the Duke said. "I think he ran out of time." She looked down at the letters in her lap. Her own name in someone else's handwriting. 20 years old. "That letter on the top," she said. "The one with my name on it. I don't recognize the hand. It's not my father's." "No," said the Duke. He was quiet for a moment. "May I see it?" She gave it to him. He looked at the outside. He turned it over. He looked at the seal, the crumbled wax. "This is my father's seal," he said. The room went very quiet. She had not opened that one yet. She had been working through the bundle from the bottom, saving her own name for last, the way she had always done with things she was afraid of. She had not yet arrived at it. "You should read it," he said. He held it out to her. "It's addressed to you. Whatever is in it belongs to you." She took it. She opened it. His father had written it 6 months before her father died. It was not long. It described an arrangement made between the two families. Not a legal arrangement, not a formal contract, but a private understanding, the kind that worked only between men who trusted each other entirely. It described an intention, a plan, a safety net. Her father's friend had written, because in these matters one should always have a safety net. In the event that certain circumstances came to pass, he wrote he hoped that she would come to Thornmere. He hoped she would know she was welcome. He hoped that his son, who was a good man and would understand the history and the obligation, would receive her not as a stranger, but as someone whose family had long been known to his own. He had signed it with his full title, and then, below that, as if an afterthought, or perhaps not an afterthought at all, simply as a friend of her father's. She folded it when she was finished. She held it in her hands for a moment. "He wrote that for me," she said. "He did. In case I needed it." Yes, she thought of her father, sitting at the dining room table with a letter in his hands. She thought of herself at 9 years old, listening. She thought of 11 miles in October and the back of a cart among the cabbages, and the past 7 weeks sleeping in the small room off the kitchen and washing dishes and waiting. "I came here to find a document," she said. "I wasn't expecting to find that." "No," said the Duke. "I don't imagine you were." She looked up at him. He was watching her with the same expression she had been trying to name for several weeks. Not pity, not judgment. Something that had more patience in it than she was used to. Something that was willing to wait. "Your father told his son about me," she said. "He did. And you didn't come to look for me." "I didn't know where you were. After I read the letters, I made some inquiries. I was told you were living at your family's estate, that the situation was managed. I didn't have reason to believe otherwise." He paused. "I should have looked harder." She thought about that. She thought about what it would have meant if someone had looked harder, had come sooner, had said to her years ago that there was a house where she was not unknown and not unwelcome. She did not let herself dwell on it too long. It was a kind of thinking that led nowhere useful. "Your solicitor," she said, "the one you mentioned, when could he look at this?" "I'll write to him this evening, and in the meantime—" "In the meantime," he said, "you're not a kitchen maid. Whatever else you are or aren't, and we'll work that out in time, you're not that. I'd like you to stay as a guest of this house until this is resolved." She looked at him. He said it with the same straightforward plainness as everything else. No performance of generosity, no expectation of gratitude. Just, "This is what makes sense, so this is what will happen." "I've been washing your dishes for 7 weeks," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry about that." She almost laughed. She had not expected to almost laugh, not in this room, not after the last 7 weeks, not after the last 2 years. She pressed it back down. "If the document holds up," she said, "and the will is contested, when?" He said, not if, and the word was said quietly, but she heard the certainty in it. "When the will is contested," she said, "I'll have means of my own. I'll be able to repay whatever." "Sylveth," he said. It was the first time he had said her name, her real name. She hadn't told him, but it was there in the letters, in the documents, written down clearly for anyone who had read what he had read. She stopped talking. "I'm not keeping an account," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her, patient, unhurried, exactly as he had been every time she had watched him from across a room or a corridor or a kitchen door for 7 weeks without understanding yet what she was looking at. She thought of what Margaret had said about him. He saw that Millie had been crying. She thought of the letter from his father, written for a girl he'd never met, a safety net, because in these matters one should always have one. She thought about her mother's money sewn into the hem of her cloak, and the cart at the end of the lane, and the small room off the kitchen, and the document in her hands. She thought, "I came here for this. I knew exactly what I was looking for, and I found it." She had not known she would find anything else. "Thank you," she said. The words felt inadequate. She said them anyway. He nodded. Then he looked toward the door. "I'll have Mrs. Partridge see to a proper room," he said. He paused, and something that might, in a different light, have been amusement passed across his face. "I imagine you know where everything is." "Most of it," she said. "Good," he said. And then he left her there, in the library, with the box of letters and the fire that had not yet been lit and the last of the October light coming through the windows. And she sat for another long moment on the floor before she finally, carefully, began to pack everything back into the box that her father had hidden for her 20 years ago in a house that had always, it turned out, been waiting for her to find her way to it.